Hello, I'm back again, and I'm reading from the Princess Royale, from Princess Mary to Princess Anne. This book is written by Heather Cathcart, and we are going to be reading about the Princess Royale, the Duchess of Fife, who was Princess Louise. I'm going to bring her picture up so you can see that. And here she is. This is the Princess Louise. She is the daughter of Edward, the granddaughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, but she is also the daughter of King Edward VII and Alexandria. You can see from this picture, she looks so much like Alexandra, the profile, the face. You see that such a distinctive profile right there. And even really, you see it in the next generation of George VI and David, who became King Edward VIII. So it's a very distinctive profile that you see here, and that's their styling right there. So I can read a little bit about it, but she was named Louise Victoria Alexandra Dagmar. She was the third child and eldest daughter of King Edward and the Queen Alexandria. She was also the younger sister of King George V, and she was given the title Princess Royale in 1905. So she was known for being shy. She had a very quiet personality. She was a very low-key member of the royal family throughout her life. So what I wanted to show you here was, see, she married Alexander Duff, who was the first Duke of Fife. And here's a picture of them together. So I feel like I've seen her portrait when she was in Inverary Castle. Inverary Castle is a beautiful castle. If you ever want to go visit it, I really recommend it. It's in England, and let's see if I can pull that up. I just really enjoyed it. It's run by the current Duke of Argyll. So, X out of that, but I'll show you what Inverary Castle looks like. It's just so beautiful. It's every bit as beautiful as this is. Set in the country, just like, yeah, that's exactly how I saw it when I visited it. And I have loads of pictures of this castle. And I feel like I saw Princess Louise in this one, but I know she's the Duke of Fife, so I don't know where the connection was there. But I did see her in one of the castles I visited in England, so I'm just gonna bring up her biography so you can see pictures of her. We will go ahead and get started. And again, you can purchase this book on the Princess Royale. It's a book that you can buy on Amazon. It's only 1 credit if you want to buy this book and hear it being read by a very lovely and pleasant lady with an English accent. She just has such a pleasant and soft tone, so fluid and so wonderful to just listen to. I've listened to half of it on Audible just to compare. But she says it in a wonderful tone, and it's downloadable on Audible. And I usually just listen to them when I'm cleaning, when I'm grocery shopping, when I'm in the car. But I'm just reading this so everybody can have access to this book, which is a worthy listen if you're interested in English history and the monarchy and the styling of Princess Royale that's happened over the decades, because there are only 7 of them, and our last one was our current Princess Anne, and She is the Princess Royal. She wasn't styled until Philip's birthday in 1987. It was like his 60th birthday. So they try to really provide distinction when they do style it and allow, at least in the later years, you cannot bestow the title until the past Princess Royal has died, and then they wait for a very special time to you know to give it a special honor and attention that it deserves. So, and you'll see when you read about the next few Princess Royals how important they are to the monarchy in supporting their brother. So, and it's given to the oldest of the siblings, the oldest girl of the siblings. So, Princess Royal, the Duchess of Fife. Begin reading. Destiny dealt the monarchy a poorish hand in princesses towards the closing year, or rather decades, of the last century. They stare from old photographs of family groups at Abergeldy or house parties at Sandringham, looking wan and snuffly, and one cannot readily believe Queen Victoria's dictum to her own eldest daughter, the Empress Frederick. The health of those girls is not enough looked after. Perhaps unsmiling, apathetic effect was due to the time exposure, or else it was a different matter of timing, for it had been argued that they were born too soon, too rapidly, one ran right after the other. Princess Louise of Wales, she was born in 1867. Princess Victoria of Wales, she was born in 1868. Princess Maud of Wales was born in 1869. The sequence is all the more debatable when one remembers that their two elder brothers, Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence, and Prince George, who later became George V, were born respectively in 1864 and 1865. The children were seldom more than 18 months apart. They were usually less, a tribute to the maternal vitality of the young Princess Alexandra, the Princess of Wales. Okay, and then we get into the part where Albert Victor was premature. So, the first comer, as well known, made his imminent arrival evident during a skating party at Windsor, and he was born at 3 pounds 12 ounces as a baby boy, 2 months premature, that same evening. Only a Windsor town doctor attended the unforeseen event. The infant's lad was in London, and so the child was hastily wrapped in a flannel petticoat, and when the royal doctors arrived and fussed around, the young mother, she laughed in their faces. It was the birth of her first daughter was to be even more difficult. She too was a winter baby. The young parents, not then married 4 years, spent Christmas at Sandringham Hall. Despite the bright log fires, the old house struck cold and damp. In the new year, the snow was slow to melt, and the princess returned to London complaining of a raging throat and agonizing pain, especially in her knee. The doctors, in fact, diagnosed rheumatoid fever, and the surgeon, Sir James Pageant, cautiously affirmed that Sandringham Hall might be damp, and the dampness might be a contributing factor. The Prince of Wales declared they would never spend another night there again, and nor did they, until the new Sandringham House was ready for occupation nearly 4 years later. It was a marvel of modernity, complete with piped heating, a light tramway in the cellar to carry coals to every room. 5 days after the onset of her illness, The princess gave birth to a daughter. She was in desperate pain, wishing for chloroform very much, as her husband wrote pathetically, though the doctors thought it best it should be denied. The child who entered the world, thus unappropriately, was a future Princess Royal. The child ought to be called Victoria, the queen wrote forcefully, meaning as a first name. But the young mother wished her to be called Louise, after her favorite sister-in-law. She wished, too, to compliment her own sister, Dagmar, who had just married the heir to the throne of all of Russia, and she had her way. There was also many friends and relatives, both English and Danish, who had not yet acted as sponsors to her children. Such host of sponsors, as Queen Victoria grumbled. On the 10th of May, when the baby was 3 months old, Alexandra had to be wheeled in a chair into the christening ceremony at Marlborough House Chapel. She was indeed to be lame for life as a result of her illness, and she walked with a stick or a parasol ever after. Yeah, that's true. You will see in photos of Alexandra that she had to have a cane. So, Louise Victoria Alexandra Dagmar. They were pretty names for a very unpretty child. When two sisters were born within the next 2 years, first Victoria and then Maud, Queen Victoria still considered them very puny and pale. They were poor, frail little fairies. Others, however, thought almost the opposite and saw them as rampaging little girls. They were thoroughly spoiled, half smothered in mother's love, and almost beyond the control of their nurse, Nanny Blackhern. The Duke of Devonshire, he lent his suburban house, Chiswick Park, to the Wales for several summers, and the children were driven out of the Marlborough House to play in the grounds on summer afternoons, riotously clambering over the ornamental sphinxes and obelisks. A protesting gardener was kicked savagely in the shin. An unwary tutor had taught the boys to shoot with bows and arrows, soon found himself pressed into the target hole of a running deer. It seems appropriate that Chiswick House became a lunatic asylum a few years later. The royal cousins were the Tecks and the Battenbergs, though the Wales a harum-scarum lot, though often amusing, and a country house romps, riding a pony up the staircase to the bedrooms, sliding hilariously down the staircase on a tea tray, were long remembered. All the service bells in the house were rung one morning, bringing out the staff in pandemonium. Princess Alexandra, who was deaf, had missed most of the uproar. "They are dreadfully wild, but I was just as bad," she said fondly, and apologized to a guest. Admittedly, the boys were a handful. The Prince of Wales was allowed the servants to administer chastisement, and the boys and girls soon grew inured to smacks and cuffs. The young Wales were, in fact, an early instance of the indulgent creed of not repressing youthful high spirits. The Duchess of Teck thought the girls were a dear little trio when she watched them riding their ponies to hounds for the first time at the age when most children were unseen and not heard of in the nursery. "They were wild as hawks," said Queen Victoria's more descriptive phrase. "They were such ill-bred, ill-trained children, and I can't fancy them at all." Bringing up her own family with kindness but strictness, she could never have agreed that rollicking self-expression might create a lively, self-confident, and pioneering new generation of royalty. For bets of a penny each, Papa, the Prince of Wales, would sit in one of his opulent armchairs and allow the small fry to race slices of buttered toast down his outstretched trousered legs. The smoother the butter, the faster, excuse me, the smoother the butter, the faster the slide contest that never reached the queen's heart. Okay, let me reread that again. The Prince of Wales would sit in one of his opulent armchairs and allow his small fry to race slices of buttered toast down his outstretched trouser legs. The smoother the butter, the faster the slide. Contest that never reached the Queen's ears. In her role as Mother Dear, Alexandra took pains to having them all taught music. She loved to take the girls home to her parents in Denmark. One of her few differences with Queen Victoria occurred indeed, when the Queen refused permission for the little Louise to undertake the journey. The Prince of Wales wrote in no uncertain terms that his mother, Alex, had made herself nearly quite ill with the poorly. You can imagine how hurt and pained she was. Her whole life is wrapped up in her children, and the Queen changed her mind. The children themselves were eagerly looking forward to these excursions, the opportunity for enjoyment with the Greek and the Danish cousins of their own age, when the grown-ups would be too busy to notice their even wilder, uninhibited pranks. Holiday visits to their grandmama at Balmoral, on the other hand, resulted in outbursts. While her elder sisters broke into floods of tears, the youngest, Maud, was known to stamp her feet and scream, "I won't! I just won't go!" Princess Louise, she could be mollified only when traveling trunks were seen to be stuffed with battered toys and rickety old dolls. All the childhood affections of the group centered on those old favorites rather than a stream of new and novel playthings. One of the Chiswick footmen took pity on the boys in this respect and spent all his spare time carving them wooden boats. The parents seemed undisturbed when the girls' governess, Miss Brown, reported that they could hardly be bothered with books. In their latter teens, their playmate and distant cousin, Princess May of Teck, and she became Queen Mary, she discovered with surprise that their education was languishing behind her own. Her mother, the Duchess of Teck, included May in her own philanthropic activities. She taught her always to think of others that were less fortunate than ourselves, taking her to a home for infirm widows to hand out packets of sugar and tea. She was encouraging her to take dinners to destitute families. May was no prig, but on one occasion, when vigorously describing one of these exhibitions, she found that Louise hardly knew what she was talking about. Princess Alexandra, Mother Dear, also scarcely realized that her children were growing up. A children's party for Louise's 19th birthday, Princess May wrote to one of her aunts in disgust. "It does not seem too ridiculous?" The fact that the Wales sisters were never encouraged to emerge from family life in those warm, cluttered rooms where they were surrounded themselves with the accumulation of small objects, china animals, seashells, tiny vases, and they lived in a warm juvenile world where they were Lulu, Toria, and Maudie, while always their brothers were adored as Eddie and Georgie. As the princesses, Louise, Victoria, and Maud, they stiflingly prided themselves on being thoroughly royal, and in a course of their assertion, they became too shy to utter a word. Thus the Wales daughters gazed lugubriously from the photographs, unsmiling even from Mother Dear's amateur camera. Their lively cousins were Queen Marie of Romania, and they never forgot the melancholy that seemed to creep into their every sentence. It gave a special quality to all talks with them, as though life would have been more wonderful and everything beautiful if it had not been so sad. The Baroness de Stockel similarly noted the characteristic conversations of one of the three sisters, Princess Louise, Princess Victoria, while listening. Back up. Princess Victoria while visiting an old folks' home in Harrogate. Poor dear, how long have you been here? The princess questioned one inmate. 20 years. You must miss your home. You must be so lonely. My heart breaks for you. The old lady attempted to reassure her that this had been long been home and that all the other patients were her friends. Poor, poor dear, murmured the royal visitor. You think you are so happy, but you are not. By the time such enlivening remarks have been repeated in every ward, the entire old folks' home was in tears. It's wonderful to do some good, cheering up these poor old souls, said the princess as a parting shot. Princess Louise, she was no better equipped driving at her mother's side in the park. She was watching the hats politely doffed, or else graciously attending a floral church service to benefit a children's hospital. Her mother occasionally toured her through the great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. But the only fruit on these visits was that Lulu's future husband ultimately became the president. Seldom encouraged to share the popularity of the Prince and the Princess of Wales, the Wales girls were shadowed by the more lively prestige of Queen Victoria's younger daughters. One can imagine the zestful captions of modern times if we had a Princess Lulu or even a Prince Lou. But for Princess Louise of Wales, there was the especially lifelong confusion with her aunt, Princess Louise, who in fact outlived her. The light of biography shines with comparative brightness on the elder Princess Louise. She later became the Marchioness of Lorne, the Duchess of Argyll. See, that's the Princess Louise that I saw at Inverary Castle. That would have been Queen Victoria's daughter, not Edward VII's daughter. In the long account, both temperament and training unfitted her to the latter distinction. As the Times was ultimately at pains to sum up, the public appearances entailed by her rank were few, and this accorded well with her own inclination. In her 21st summer, Lulu, she seemed particularly low and depressed, and lively Princess May felt called on to mount a rescue operation. This was readily done by including her in a family holiday to Switzerland and the Italian lakes. The future Queen Mary eagerly looked forward to the jaunt, as we are great friends and sound fond of each other. But Lulu's spirits were as dismal as the rain clouds that conceal the Alps. From St. Moritz, she was eager to move on to Como, from Como to Palagio, always anxious to see a place, to say she had been there, but she was quickly bored if she could not move on to the next. The Duchess of Teck, she decided she had the same inert, apathetic nature as her brother, Prince Eddie. But in fairness, she may have misjudged the true cause of Louise's alternating moping and restlessness. In reality, the princess was worrying about a man with whom she found herself falling in love and wondering, too, with her utter lack of self-confidence, whether he or anyone else would ever be willing to marry her. She had doubtless heard something of the difficulties years earlier when her Aunt Louise had fallen impetuously in love, not with a foreign prince, but with a young Scottish Marquis of Lorne. The marriage had not turned out happy, and within 7 years, Aunt Louise's aversion to her husband grew overwhelmingly that his second stint he served his second stint as the Governor General in Canada, which she refused to accompany him, and she risked a public scandal. Would family history repeat itself? The shy young Louise had intimate cause to ponder the question, for the man whom she had set her heart on was also a Scotsman, who everyone called For the man whom she had set her heart on was also a Scotsman, whom everyone called Macduff. He was one of her father's friends. He was tall and rugged in his looks, but with the drawback of being 18 years older than herself. The public romantically imagined that she had first seen him from a distance while watching the guns at Sandringham. The family picture was that he was one of the few closer friends of the Prince of Wales, of whom the Queen approved, a Scotsman of irreproachable lineage, of vast ancestral acres, and banking wealth. Through one family line, he was the great-grandson of William IV and Mrs. Jordan, which was respectable enough, and he was, in fact, a Balmoral neighbor, and he had served as member of the Parliament for the adjacent constituency of Elgin and Nairnshire. Shortly after he had succeeded his father as the 6th Earl of Fife, the Queen entrusted him with a mission to Germany to invest the King of Saxony with the Garter, which was favored indeed. In Lulu's earliest memories, however, she had been a cheerful victim of an April Fool's joke on apple pie beds. Her brother George's earlier letters are full of references to shooting days with Papa and Eddie and Lord Fife. The fishing at Gordon Castle with Macduff was such a good one that year that Lulu and Maudie got one each. While the deer-stalking season, George reported that Macduff, he managed to get 5 and 7 each day, sometimes even before breakfast. In spite of the measure of his public career, Macduff was also abnormally shy. At Princess Beatrice's wedding, when she was 18 years old, Louise was a bridesmaid. It was said that he and Louise naturally sought each other's company as two of the shyest people there. On account of this, his first intended meeting with the Princess of Wales was a very young man who had been a non-starter. He was supposed to have been head of the Mar clan to meet the royal couple, but nothing would induce him to go, and the Earl of Sandwich had to head the march through the snow instead. If strategy is necessary in wooing a princess, Macduff did his best by leasing Castle Rising, which was near Sandringham. Prince Lulu, in fact, got her man in July 1889. The Queen approved their engagement with outward gracious pleasure, and she had a deep inward satisfaction. It is a very brilliant marriage in a worldly point of view, she frankly summed up her daughter Vicky to her Vicky in Germany, and he was immensely rich. Writing to Macduff himself, she struck a more kindly note. That my beloved grandchild should have her home in dear Scotland and in dear Highlands is an additional satisfaction. Lulu's close friend, Prince May, however, viewed the match with some reservation. For the future Princess Royal to marry a subject that seems rather strange, she wrote to her Aunt Augusta. Don't you think so? It is also deeply interesting that the text to learn that the Lord Fife have taken East Sheen Lodge close to their own house, which was White Lodge in Richmond Park, so that the newlyweds would soon be their neighbors. Once announced, the wedding plans went forward with astonishing though innocent celerity. To get things over quickly, it might alleviate the bride's dreadful nervousness of public ceremony, even for her own wedding in the comparative privacy of the Chapel Royal, Buckingham Palace. Princess Alexandra's lifelong companion, Charlotte Knowles, nonetheless said that there had never been anyone more in love and thought it was inappropriate that the wedding anthem, O Perfect Love, was to be sung for the first time. Princess May was one of the 8 bridesmaids, in pique veil and crepe de chine, with pink rosebuds in her hair. Amid the white roses and huge palms in the palace chapel, everyone could forget that the July weather was as gloomy as November. Even though Queen Victoria considered the bride to be very pale and too plainly dressed, she noticed she had her veil over her face, which no princess had ever done before, and she thinks it's unbecoming and it just doesn't seem right. To one of the younger wedding guests, Miss Marie Adine, nevertheless, Princess Louise was lovely, and the bridegroom too, she thought. She looked at a nice man, his manner to the Queen being particularly good. This was the same mordant spectator found the Duchess of Teck rather like a large purple plush pincushion, and the Queen not too mournful in black and silver brocade. Then the bridegroom lost his way, she noticed, in the have and to hold sentence, said the Archbishop. He had to repeat it, and there was also a good deal of fumbling with the ring. At the wedding breakfast, the Queen unexpectedly made a brief speech, and she announced her intention of creating the bridegroom the Duke of Fife and Marquess of Macduff. Then our usual witness, Miss Adine, she found that everything ended beautifully. The groom provided a splendid coach with a gorgeous footman in green and silver livery and carried off his bride in a great style. I went down to the door and saw the very last of them. The cheering was so tremendous. The Shah of Persia had offered his palace at Tehran for the honeymoon, having met the couple in London, but they declined these exotic delights, preferring the charm and retirement of Sheen. The more immediate effect of the marriage was the surprise blossoming of Lulu. She soon seemed quite a different person. She looked so pretty, almost as pretty as her mother. One Richmond guest was to write that autumn. She had pretty blue eyes, and they looked so mischievous and happy. Even to the searching gaze of the Duchess of Teck, Louise was soon in particular good looks, and both seemed very flourishing, so thoroughly happy and contented that it does one's heart good to see them. In the exclusive, self-contained world of friends and relatives, indeed the Fifes could forget their shyness and seek their pleasures as they pleased. We find them spinning off to Brighton as guests of the Arthur Sassoons, and soon taking a house there with a magnificent sea view of a Madria walk. They sped through the quieter lanes behind the South Downs, enjoying a new fun of bicycling, and one hears of Louise at the opera, or at first nights, or playing the organ in Sandringham Church, or entertaining the Comte and the Comtesse de Paris, and their beautiful daughter Helene at Mar Lodge, where the Fifes hospitably fill the houses for the salmon fishing. But the public affairs and royal duty there is scarcely a word. It was in private life and in private lives that the princess excelled. One gains the impression from her few surviving family letters that if a marriage bureau with a royal warrant had been possible in her day, Princess Louise, the Duchess of Fife, could have capably managed it. Brother Eddie, for example, had lightly fallen in and out of love a dozen times, but when he fluttered his languid eyes at the lovely Helene, his married sister did everything possible to open a path to the altar. As a Roman Catholic and daughter of the pretender to the French throne, Helene may have been wildly unsuitable, yet the difficulties heightened Lulu's enthusiasm, and she arranged a string of meetings for the two at Sheen and Marlodge until August 1890, when they became privately engaged. Even the Queen approved. After Louise had campaigned indefatigably for her brother, not until it became clear that the Comte de Paris would never agree to his daughter's change of religion did the Queen sadly mention that it should be let alone for the present. Eddie, after all, was next. He was the next one in line to the throne. The Princess Helene went to Rome that autumn to make a personal plea to the Pope, only to find no hope of gaining approval. But since one possible bride was unsuitable, Louise was already casting around for another, and we need not be surprised to find Princess May soon visiting Marlodge for the first time. A funny-looking place she found it, with scattered houses with verandas. For rustic effect, the verandas were supposed to supported by tree trunks, corseted black, and when Marlodge caught fire 4 or 5 years later, the timbers formed spontaneous tinder and the buildings blazed to the skies. For other lovers' meetings, there was also the townhouse in Portman Square, which the Fifes had furnished by degrees and done up in very good taste. As the Duchess of Teck saw with approving but perhaps envious eyes, the walls are for the most part silk, the decorations being in the white stucco with fine old mahogany doors. They were très chic. Among other adjuncts was a nursery, and the first occupant in May 1891 was a daughter, Alex, later Princess Arthur of Connaught. The Princess of Wales rushed to see the baby. I was a happy grandmother, and I held my naked little grandchild in my arms. It squeaked like a little sucking pig. A few months later, Lulu had the pleasure of recording that Eddie and May were engaged. They had celebrated their betrothal by going to see Cavalera Rusticana. With its music, then bewitching London, Lulu speedily set about organizing a Boxing Day dance at Sheen for the couple, and made sure that the Viennese band played Cave Melodies again and again. It was the most charming, and we all thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, as Princess May ardently wrote. And then Lulu's younger sister, Maudie, caught influenza at Sandringham, and a week later, Eddie realized that he too had the flu. Within a week, the family gathered in horror in his little room, and in London, the great bell of Westminster began to toll. The newsboys ran shouting through the streets, and thus Britain learned the shattering news that the heir presumptive to the throne was no more. With the pertinacity that she rarely displayed in public, Princess Louise began to help repair all their lives. Toward the end of the sad year of 1892, she learned that she was to have another baby, and while in retirement, she made a point of inviting Princess May to Sheen and writing to her brother George about it. This encouraged Georgie, in turn, to pursue a diffident but affectionate correspondence. I am glad you often go and see Louise at Sheen. You have often been in my thoughts lately, he would write to May. Louise's second daughter, Maud, later the Countess of Harewood, was born April 1893 and was 4 weeks old when George returned from visits to Athens and Rome and stayed with his sister at Sheen. May came to tea, and all three trooped up to the nursery to see the new baby. Like an arch conspirator, Louise then jokingly, "Now, George, don't you think you ought to take May into the garden to look at the frogs in the pond?" If she soon peeped through the windows to see what was happening, her eyes met a rewarding scene. We walked together in the garden, and May recorded in her diary, "He proposed to me, and I accepted him." Louise and Macduff were delighted. Such was the betrothal of the future Queen Mary and King George V. Well, I tell you, this lady, Princess Louise, was quite the matchmaker. Another visitor at East Sheen Lodge the summer was Princess Royal, the Empress Frederick, who praised the charming house so much that Queen Victoria came over to see for herself. At this moment of time, before George and Mary married and raised their family, the Queen must have been aware of the frail links of the succession. Not months earlier, George had also been seriously ill with typhoid fever. He had been taken, as well as Eddie. Princess Louise would have been heiress presumptive instead. Lulu's two younger sisters were bridesmaids at Princess May's wedding in the Chapel Royal. Somewhat to May's chagrin, Lulu herself helped George choose wallpaper and carpets for the newlyweds' home at York Cottage in Sandringham. The following year, May was on a brief holiday in Switzerland. She was recuperating from the birth of her first baby. This was the future Edward VIII, and later he became the Duke of Windsor, when she chanced to see a fire in the Alpine village. "The fire engines were slow," she wrote. "The 5 small wooden chalets were burnt to the ground. It was horrid to see." By coincidence, it was just a year later at Marlodge, with his little chalets, was destroyed in the same way. The Fifes accepted this domestic disaster philosophically, and Princess Louise, undismayed, promptly penciled a rough sketch for a new Marlodge, chiefly distinguished by 2 wings of guest rooms. The elaborate red-roofed building with deep eaves faced with mock black timbering, which still dominates the upper D, and it suitably is now a wedding venue. There were, in fact, no fewer than 120 rooms at Lulu's modest idea of a home. And why not? When Macduff was a president of the British South African Company, with its royal charter, it was granted shortly after his marriage, and it was vested interest in the Transvaal and Rhodesia in diamonds and gold. Queen Victoria humored Louise by laying the foundation stone of the new house, grandly driving over in a carriage with 4 greys and 2 outriders on greys. The bagpipes skirled, and the fife men, with spears and kilts, looked well. The little ladies of Fife came down muffed in shawls, the daughters of Alexandra and Maud. They were aged 4 and 2, delicate but still little dears. The many dishes were well prepared. This was the Mar Lodge of infinite hospitality and Scottish entertainment, which figures so often in Edwardian reminiscence. Macduff had been saddened to lose his great collection of stags' heads in the fire, but he resumed his enthusiasm until 3,000 skulls decorated the arched pine rafters of the enormous new ballroom. After a day of deer stalking, the finest carcasses formed the grisly centerpiece of triumphant Scottish reels, wildly dancing by torchlight. The Mar fire, one must mention, had been caused less dramatically by a plumber who forgot a lighted candle. While the new mansion slowly rose, Princess Louise also dedicated herself to a more delicate fabric and the skillful architecture of yet another marriage. So she was quite a matchmaker. Her two sisters were now in their late 20s, and even the tactful Empress Frederick cast discreet hints that it would not be wise to leave them in marital vagueness much longer. Victoria was behind, she was beyond helping. She first lost her heart to one of Macduff's friends, a member of the Baring banking family, but unfortunately a commoner and thus judged ineligible. At last she fell in love with her father's equerry, Sir Arthur Davidson. He was a match equally decreed impossible by parents. Like so many unmarried daughters of the time, Princess Victoria became, as the Grand Duchess of Olga said, just a glorified maid to her mother. But Maudie, or Harry, as she was now nicknamed, she was more amenable. She was very pretty. Just then, as the Empress Frederick noticed, she was like a little rose with her bright eyes. Since no one more likely seemed in view, Lulu's judicious glance fell on her bachelor cousin, Prince Charles of Denmark, the second son of the king, and considered hitherto, since he was 3 years Maud's junior, a very much looked at. He was a very nice young fellow. He was brave and he was modest, Lord Esher thought of him. This youthful potential husband was in the Danish Navy and chanced to have a shore leave in London, whereupon Louise made sure that he partnered Maudie to dances and first nights and was constantly thrown into her company at Portman Square in Sheen. The engagement came in the nick of time, only days before he was posted on a 5-month cruise of the West Indies. A year later, the Tsar Nicholas was a precipient visitor of Mar Lodge. When the couple were concluding their honeymoon there, and wrote that he found it rather strange for them to be husband and wife. Indeed, the first child of the marriage, later King Olaf of Norway, was not born until 7 years later. Though Princess Maud had to make her home in Copenhagen, she lamented that her husband always was at sea, and suffered rebukes from the mother dear that she must on no account forget she had married a naval man. There were no other children. For Princess Louise, a more personal sequel to her matchmaking awaited her in 1905 when the Norwegian people decided that their country should become a kingdom. So they invited Prince Charles to the throne as Haakon VII. Lulu was delighted that Maudie would become a queen, although it was not a role she ever had desired for herself. She found her father's coronation as Edward VII 3 years earlier. She thought it was a hideous ordeal with its processions and publicity, and only the need of taking her children to see the king in his robes beforehand had persuaded her to play a supporting part in that. coronation. The king could see for himself that Lulu was not the stuff of which princesses royal are made of. With his youngest daughter about to become a queen, however, the need for enhanced distinction for his eldest daughter gained fresh urgency. Haakon was to be proclaimed on 18 November, and on 19 November, Edward VII's birthday, honors began with the announcement. The king had been graciously pleased to declare His Majesty's eldest daughter, Her Royal Highness Princess Louise Victoria Alexandra Dagmar, the Duchess of Fife, shall henceforth bear the style and title of Princess Royal. There is no sign that Louise welcomed her new style and dignity. Oh, on the contrary, she stayed away from her father's Balmoral weekends more than ever, even keeping her children secluded from near relatives. Her happiest hours were still spent alone, salmon fishing her favorite and well-tried pools in the reaches of the Dee, and her landing of 7 large salmon in a day remained the record of a lady's rod for several years. The new status of Royal Highness for her daughters was nevertheless welcome, and before her brother's coronation as George V on June 1911, she battled for their right to wear the robes of royal princesses, which was doubtful by paternity, professing herself hurt when she met refusal. Since her eldest girl, Princess Alex, she was short-sighted and insisted on wearing academic-looking spectacles, the ensemble would not have been conducive to a royal glamour. Okay, we're just about done. In the winter of 1911, the newly crowned king and Queen Mary, they were looking forward to the great adventure of their coronation reception in India. While the Princess Royal and her husband planned to winter in the warm climate of Egypt as they had for 3 years or 4 years past. The evening before George and May sailed, the Fifes attended the private dinner party at the palace, and then early in December set out themselves with their 2 daughters, then aged 20 and 18, on the liner Delhi. "We are so peaceful and contented," wrote young Princess Alex. They knew a few of the other passengers, and now they could relax as if incognito, which of course they always decidedly preferred. Louise rarely felt so close to her husband as when alone with him aboard ship on their winter journeys. They encountered rough seas in the Bay of Biscay, but in dear Macduff's company, the princess said she always felt very secure. In the night of 13 December, it was particularly black and stormy. No one could sleep, but the captain's bulletins had reminded them they were off the coast of Morocco and would soon reach the calm seas that were beyond Gibraltar. At 2 a.m., Macduff estimated reassuringly that they were under the lee of Cape Spartel. Then there was a splitting and a grinding crash and the shouts of men. The liner had run aground. The Fifes, they began throwing on their clothes, unaware of the extent of the disaster. Macduff was still in his nightshirt and dressing gown. He was helping his wife and their daughters, and they had already come to the cabin when an officer asked them to don their life belts and go to the deck saloon without further ado. It seemed incredible to learn that the crew had been ordered to man the boats, to hear the calm request for passengers, "Please stand firm until our boats were ready." An officer asked the princess to come to one of the first boats, But royal behavior patterns are not erased so readily. The girls were transferred, yet the Princess Royal and her husband firmly refused to leave the ship. They refused to leave the ship until all other passengers had done so. They did not know until later that many of the lifeboats were smashed on the rocks by heavy waves. Though many struggled safely ashore, some passengers and sailors they were drowned. The lifeboats of HMS Edinburgh also came on the scene, and it was only behind the last cluster of passengers that the princess at length descended the long, steep ladder and jumped into the outstretched arms of the crew. The waves were huge, she wrote afterwards. They swept down on us and they filled the boat. We bailed, but not any good. Water came up to our knees and she sank, flinging us all out. We floated in our belts. Waves like iron walls tore over us. They knocked us over. Admiral Craddock gripped my shoulder and saved me. Thank God, my Macduff and children both on the beach, but had been under too. Breathless and shivery, as she termed it, the party then had to walk through the gale and lashing rain 4 miles along the shore. They were trying to wring out their clothes, guided only by the distant light of Cape Spartel. Macduff gave his own soaking dressing gown to a woman and had only his nightshirt. The lighthousemen did their best to warm and dry them out, and lent Fife a pair of trousers. But then they next had to set out on mules to ride 10 miles through the storm in order to reach the safety of the British legation in Tangier. By way of period atmosphere, the Times asserted that the Princess Royal conversed with great vivacity on little incidents. Now, that was an ordeal. Not many people do that. That was amazing. They waited until everybody got off the ship and were safely ashore. By God, sir, she was splendid, a seaman told the Times correspondent, as if in Drury Lane melodrama. But it was not until much later, after writing exciting letters to all her relations, that the Princess Royal remembered publicly to thank the officers and crew. The Fife's donation to the fund for the families of seamen who had drowned had to wait on the subscription from the king, and when he gave £120, protocol required them to give only £100. Despite the shipwreck, an extraordinary nightmare, as the princess called it, they soon continued their journey aboard the Hampshire, the port said, and then in Cairo and Khartoum. Yet the hours of exposure had drained off their strength more than imagined. And as soon the Duke of Fife caught a chill, in Princess Alex's words. It was a great tragedy suddenly cast upon us, and in 10 days he died of pneumonia. The Duke of Fife was brought home in state aboard HMS Powerful and buried in the private chapel of Mar Lodge, where nearly 20 years later he was followed by his widow. Prince Alex married Prince Arthur of Connaught in 1913. Princess Maud, she married the 11th Earl of Southwark in 1923. Between these events, the Princess Royal, she was all but obliterated by the public memory, save to the local centenary who made much of her patronage of the Braymore Games. When she died in 1931, though only the age of 63, she seemed a very unfamiliar figure of the distant Edwardian past to a new and younger generation. Today, Mar Lodge is owned and managed by the National Trust of Scotland. There are modernities, and yet much of the furnishing is still unchanged. Unique among hotel facilities, there is an oddity that guests may ask the receptionist for the keys to a private chapel. There, the tombs of the Duke of Fife and Princess Royal, they lie side by side, and the visitors may pay their respects. A subtle eccentricity of royal hospitality that might have appealed to the publicly shy but privately ever sociable Lulu. King George V and Queen Mary, the earlier Georgie and May of family life, they reigned from 1910 until January 20th, 1936. With the passing of the Princess Royal Dowager Duchess of Fife at her home in Portman Square on the 5th of January 1931, the title and distinction was again vacant. Nearly a year later, Princess Mary, the Countess of Harewood, she was the only daughter of the King and Queen. She was declared Princess Royal in the New Year's honors list. And that's the end. So we will go on to the next chapter, but I want to see what this Mar Lodge looks like. Mar Lodge. Oh, look at that. That's really pretty. Yeah. Yeah, let's read through here. It's a Highland estate in western Aberdeenshire, Scotland, owned and managed by the National Trust of Scotland. Okay, this would be, Mar Lodge is 4 miles west of the village of Braemere, which is close to the Balmoral Castle, give or take. The estate is recognized as the most important nature conservation landscapes in British Isle and occupied 8% of the Cairngorms National Park. Well, that's a very cool national park. I'd like to go back there and observe it more. If you ever have a chance to go to this area, to the Balmoral Castle, the River Dee, which is very pretty. I don't know if you can see that River Dee. It's just really pretty. I love Scotland. So here's Inverness. Here's Ben Nevis, which it makes for great hiking there somewhere. But halfway between Edinburgh and Inverness is Balmoral Castle. It's like I feel like it's been a while, a couple hours drive, 2.5 hours drive from Edinburgh, but Inverness is the midway point. And from here, we went and visited the Isle of Skye. We took a day tour from the Isle of Skye, which is a day trip, but really would love to go stay on that island someday. But at any rate, here it is. Somewhere up in here is the Dunrobin Castle, which we saw, which was very cool. So, anyway, that is it. I mean, she led a quiet, pretty low key of all the royal siblings, but she was a matchmaker. behind the scenes, and they were in a shipwreck, which is amazing. They're quite survivors, but sadly, her husband did not live that much longer after the shipwreck, the Duke of Fife. So that is the end of Princess Louise, the Duchess of Fife, the daughter of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandria. And we are now going to read in the next section about Princess Mary, the Countess of Harewood. So